First item on the agenda is the floodplains regulation review. So as I mentioned before, we discussed that in detail with Attorney Cipolletta at the Town Council Planning Board meeting just recently. And before we move to a vote, I want to see if there's any other comments by the board.
So I had just noticed we got a draft updated with the numbering corrected. I noticed one number was missed, so we should, in any recommendation we make, note that to fix that number. And then there's one sentence in one paragraph that doesn't seem to read properly. I think there are a few extra words in the sentence that didn't get edited properly, so we should make a note to review that sentence.
Okay, for the section that was wrong, what's the number that's cited and then the number
It's
that we want?
section 1740.030, Federal Floodplain District, and it's the first sentence. And I would estimate that there are 7 extra words. Designated on the town's special flood hazard areas, I think is redundant and restated later on in the sentence. Designated on the town's special flood hazard areas.
Okay.
And then the number that was not fixed was the number for the definitions section. It still says 1750-220 instead of 1740-220.
Instead of 1740, 220, you said? Got it.
It should say 1740. But otherwise, I have no other objections to it.
Okay. Do we have a motion to adopt or recommend adoption of the floodplain map and the regulations review to town council, barring those two clerical corrections?
I'll make a motion to make that, the planning board should make that recommendation.
Second.
Second.
We'll do a roll call. Chris Boyce, yes. Gina Demento. Anna Merceret.
Yes.
Kimberly Hirsch.
Yes.
Sarah Jane Fornes.
Yes.
Alyssa Gamble. Jason Plutro. Yes. Okay, that's approved. We'll send our recommendation over to the town council. We know that's time sensitive for people's flood insurance. So we'll get that resolved. The next item on the agenda, which I'm sure everybody's here for, is 3A. This is our first presentation with our consultant, RKG. I think the way we'll go about this is RKG will give a presentation to start, walk us through the current thinking for Winthrop, then we'll open up to public comment. We'll try to limit public comment to 3 minutes each person, try to speak once, and then we'll go to board discussion. So we'll start with RKG. Eric.
Great, okay, good, it's on. So tonight we just want to quickly run through the requirements just as a reminder and update for everyone. And then we'll jump into some of the districts that we've modeled to give you a sense of where we think we could reach at least one potential compliance scenario, recognizing there's a lot of different ways that this could go. We worked with the town manager's office trying to focus on potential districts where the impact would be as minimal as possible. So hopefully we can have a discussion about the districts that we've selected to run the model. Any thoughts that the planning board might have, changes that you might want to make. This is just our first proposal, recognizing it's not the only one that we can consider. Okay, so just a little bit about what Winthrop's requirements are, just as a quick reminder, at least as they stand as of today. So we know we need to have a minimum land area for the districts, either one district or multiple districts of 12 acres. We need to have at least one of those districts be of 6 acres. The smallest any non-contiguous individual district can be is 5 acres. We need to have the minimum zoning unit capacity for the 882 units. And across all the districts, they need to average to the 15 dwelling units per acre. So those are the requirements that we're trying to hit as we do our modeling work. So as you may remember from maybe your prior consultants. There are kind of three key pieces to the MBTA modeling work that we're doing. There's the land area, which pertains to which areas of Winthrop are we looking at placing the MBTA 3A districts over. So that's the size of the districts and meeting all the land area requirements. Then there's also the capacity, which is the zoned capacity of those districts, where we're trying to hit at least 882 units. And then those two things together, the land area and the number of units, you divide those two and you're trying to get to the average of the 15 dwelling units per acre. Allison, if you can go to the next slide, please. And then the third key piece is the zoning, so the actual written zoning language and regulations that would be applied to each of the either singular district or districts, depending on which direction you go in, that would regulate the development and allow for that unit capacity and that density to take place. Next slide. But the key to remember, the way that I always like to think about it, is they're each sort of cogs in the wheel of MBTA 3A. And the more you turn one, it's going to impact all of the others. So although we can be very iterative with where we look and how we treat the zoning, the tweaks that we make to one of those elements or any of those elements, they end up impacting all the others. So it's just important to keep that in mind as we go through the process with you. Okay, so we just wanted to go through each of the tests before we get to the actual models that we ran. So just as a reminder, for Winthrop's land area requirements, we know that we need at least 12 acres within our MBTA district or districts. And then we know that we need at least one of those districts to be 6 acres in total. The rest can be 5 acres or more. And I don't know if you got this primer last time, but just so you know, as you see the districts come up on the maps later on in the presentation, they have to be drawn in a specific way to maintain what the state refers to as contiguity. So these two examples in the PowerPoint, the example in blue represents just a hypothetical district that would be considered contiguous, where the district boundaries encompass all of the parcels. The district is drawn either to the parcel lines or it can be drawn to road center lines, depending on how Winthrop typically draws its zoning districts. Either is acceptable for MBTA. And you can also jump rights of way in order to include parcels that might be across the street or even across an intersection. That's totally fine. The parcels in the district don't all have to be encompassed neatly within a particular set of right of way. And then we just have to make sure that those districts are always larger than, or either 5 acres or larger. The example in the brown would show an example of a non-contiguous district because it's sort of two separate parts of parcels or blocks, and then they're sort of strung together in a unique way by using the right-of-way in a linear fashion to bridge those two districts. So that would not be allowed, just so that when we're drawing the districts, we can keep that in mind. The other two considerations are you are allowed to have what we commonly refer to as sub-districts within a district. So the example on the top where you have the green and the blue is one potential example where the outline of the green and the blue in totality would represent one district. But within that district, you could have different zoning parameters for the parcels that are along the outside or the edge of the district in green, and you can also have different zoning parameters for the parcels that are in blue. In Winthrop, if you think about the regulations that are within the central business district, that could be one example of where if you have parcels abutting existing residential, there's a limitation in terms of the height of those buildings that have to be limited to 2.5 stories. If they're not abutting a residential, you could go as high as 4 stories. But you could envision that the CBD is one large district, but then within it you have sub-districts with different zoning regulations. So according to the law, that's totally fine and adds to the flexibility that we can apply to a district. The example on the bottom right would be a district that would not be acceptable where you're purposely cutting out a piece of public land. So let's pretend that public land is a park. You can't cut districts around that to purposely exclude it. Although there would be no development allowed on that public land or on that park using the MBTA model, we would just need to include it within the district for contiguity purposes. But we recognize that it wouldn't be developed on. It would be the parcels that are on either side. So just something to think about if we run into any instances where there's public land within our districts. So just for a recap, as we go through the district modeling exercise, we got to make sure we have at least 12 acres of land across our districts, one contiguous district of 6 acres. Any non-contiguous districts that are elsewhere in the community need to be 5 acres or more, and we just have to make sure that our districts are drawn in a compliant manner. Okay, for the second test, that's the unit capacity test. So we know that as of today, Winthrop's requirement is zoning unit capacity for 882 units. And across all of our districts, whether we have 1 or we have 5, we need to make sure that the average is 15 dwelling units per acre. And I just want to stress this, as I do in every presentation, that the MBTA communities is not about development or housing production. It's about a zoning exercise. So we need to make sure for whatever districts we're testing that we have the zoning capacity and that the zoning that is applied to those districts would allow for at least 882 units. Just as a quick reminder, multifamily housing is the definition per 3A actually allows for a fairly wide range of housing types. The definition for multifamily used in 3A is a structure with 3 or more units in it. So if you think about a triple decker, under the law that actually counts as part of the definition of multifamily housing. So it essentially goes from something that's 3 units all the way to something that's 1,000 units or whatever the upper threshold might be. You could also have 2 duplexes on a single lot. That also counts as multifamily housing. So you could have 2 separate duplexes on one parcel. That would also count under the definition of multifamily housing. So a lot of flexibility within the law as to what counts as multifamily. Okay, so that was my super quick primer. I know you all have seen this before, so I wanted to keep it brief. So what has been modeled so far? So working with the town manager's office and sort of looking at some of the prior work that's been done, we modeled 4 different districts in Winthrop. I don't know if you can see the colors up there. They look a little washed out. I apologize. We modeled the Central Business District, which is shown, if you can see it, in purple. We modeled the Seal Harbor Road, which is shown in blue, kind of in the top right corner. We modeled a linear corridor along Shirley Street, which is shown kind of that skinny linear corridor in orange. And then we modeled the Governor's Park development, which is shown in yellow. The table to the left of the map shows the results from the MBTA compliance model and our GIS analysis of each of the districts. Just so you could get a sense of, just within these districts themselves, can we get to compliance, or at least some semblance of compliance. The other reason why some of these districts were chosen is either the zoning that's in place today does allow for multifamily housing, or in the case of Seal Harbor, Governor's Park, there's actually multifamily housing there today. So we're trying to place districts in locations that actually already have multifamily housing on the ground today that exist in Winthrop. For Seal Harbor, and actually for all 4 of the districts that we modeled, all of them are actually larger than 12 acres. So we would meet the 6-acre minimum, having one district of at least 6 acres, we would meet that. Then for all the other districts, we are over 5 acres since they're non-contiguous districts, so we're good there. And then if you look in the totals column for the gross acreage, we're at 56.3. So right now we're well above the 12-acre minimum that we would need. For net acreage, this is just the gross acreage minus any what the state calls excluded land. So excluded land is any publicly owned land. So any land that's owned by the town, owned by the state, owned by the federal government, any other public entity. That can include parks, conservation land, open spaces, public buildings, anything like that that's publicly owned. That has to get subtracted out. We can't count that as part of the unit capacity measure. It also excludes any environmentally sensitive or protected land, so wetlands or open water bodies is a great example of that. Those get taken out as well, recognizing that there are both state and often local regulations that would not allow development to take place on those kinds of environmentally sensitive lands. So that's why we have the net acreage. So in the districts that we modeled, there's actually not a lot of excluded land, which is a good thing, which means that we can try to maximize those districts and and not have those districts have to spill out into the rest of town. So that's what the first two lines represent. Then the third line is the unit capacity. So you can see the unit capacity for each of the districts. And after we go through this table, we've actually broken each district down individually. So we'll get into more detail. I just wanted to give you an overview of kind of what we've modeled so far. For unit capacity in Seal Harbor, the MBTA model, using the zoning that we applied, has a unit capacity from a zoning perspective of 266 units, Shirley Street at 64, Governor's Park at 341, and the Central Business District at 515. So you can see that brings us to a total of 1,186. Again, quite a bit above the 882 that we need for MBTA compliance. There's some sort of twists in there that I'll go through, especially with the CBD. We have some options there, recognizing that that number is above the 882. And then when we look at the density, which is a calculation of, for each district, it's the unit capacity number divided by the net acreage, so the actual developable acreage. So for Seal Harbor, we would take 266 units divided by 10.2. You roughly get the 26 dwelling units per acre that you see in the last line of the table. Shirley Street, we're at 5.2, Governor's Park, 22.8, and the CBD, 32.4, for an average of 22.2. Again, you can see, even though Shirley Street is at 5.2, it's not at 15. That's totally fine because the other districts make up for that reduction in density, and we come to a total average of 22.2. Okay, so now if I can, I'd like to just go through each individual district, show you the zoning that we ran through the MBTA model, and a little bit more about the results. So each of the following 4 slides will be set up in the exact same manner. You'll see a map of the district on the right-hand side. The district that we modeled will be colored similar to the colors that we showed on the previous screen. So for Seal Harbor, you'll see the parcels in blue that we modeled. That would be the district that we modeled. I think it's 3 parcels in total. What we used here for Seal Harbor is the existing zoning. It's the residential C mid-rise apartment complex zoning. Typically a city or town's zoning bylaw or ordinance includes a lot more language and a lot more regulations than the MBTA compliance model actually takes into account. What we've shown here in the table are the primary zoning factors that go into the model to drive the unit capacity number or generate the unit capacity number. So first we have to input the minimum lot size. In this district, the minimum lot size is 20,000 square feet, so almost half an acre in size. The existing zoning has a height limit of 6 stories, so that's an important component of the model because that drives the number of units that could be in a particular building based on the height. The maximum lot coverage, so the amount that a building or a structure could take up on a parcel of land, is 20%, so leaving 80% not to be covered by buildings. The minimum open space requirement is 30%. The setbacks are 50 feet for front, side, and rear. We modeled 2 parking spaces per unit, regardless of the unit size, 2 parking spaces per unit. And then in your zoning, you also have what's called a lot area per dwelling unit. Basically, it's a density factor. So if you were to take the size of the parcel and divide it by 2,000 square feet, that essentially dictates how many units you could have on that parcel of land. So we plugged all these different zoning parameters into the compliance model. And then we put the parcels into the compliance model, so we have the size of those parcels, run it against the zoning. And effectively, what the model does is it runs a build-out analysis on a parcel-by-parcel basis. So for every single parcel that we put in, it looks at the zoning, looks at the parcel, marries those two, and comes up with the potential unit capacity for each parcel. The table that's just below the zoning just sort of reiterates what we showed in the previous slide, but this is just specific to the Seal Harbor district. So we have a gross acreage of 12.3, net acreage once we subtract out undevelopable land of 10.2. The one thing you'll notice in here and on the rest of the slides is we wanted to show you how many existing units are in the district today. So we pulled the tax cards from the town for every single parcel in all the districts that we modeled and looked at the unit count today. We did asterisk this because we're trying to just verify this with the assessor's office as well. So take this as preliminary. We think this is right because we pulled it from the tax cards, but hopefully we reserve the right to change it in the future just in case. So existing units across these 3 parcels, according to the tax cards, is 394. But actually, when we modeled this zoning against the parcels, the zoned unit capacity is a lot lower. It's 266. So let's just say for a second, if we wanted to go with this district as one of our districts, and we put an MBTA overlay district over these 3 parcels with these zoning parameters that you see on the screen, the MBTA model is saying the zoned capacity is less, like 130 units less than what exists on the ground today. So just let that sink in for a second. So again, I said, we're trying to minimize the impact. This is one way in which we can do that. Then we take the unit capacity over the net acreage and we come up
So,
with
Eric,
the
if I
26
could ask
units
a
an
quick
acre.
question on that?
Of course.
For clarity, because I think it's helpful to see that the reduced impact in some of these areas. But that essentially is saying that to take advantage of the MBTA 3A overlay on this district, you'd have to demo what's there today, and then you can only build back 70% of what exists.
Correct.
Right. So special permits and variances are what allowed for the 394 units. Those are not, I mean, you're not eligible for that with the 3A district.
Under the overlay, if you were to apply these zoning parameters, that's correct. You'd actually be, in effect, down zoning it.
Right. No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so that was Seal Harbor. Happy to come back to any of these if anybody has questions too.
Actually, I do have a question about the downzoning aspect. Is there no way with the MBTA zoning that we would get credit for having more units than what they're requiring? Because we're saying they're existing?
Yep. So one potential option you can't get credits for existing units. It doesn't work that way. It's all about the zoning. But one thing that we could do as an option, and we didn't propose it because we're trying to see how we can get to the minimum. One thing we could do would be to tweak the zoning parameters that we used to get closer to the 394 units through changing the zoning. So, for example, maybe we play with the lot area per dwelling unit. It's 2,000 now. Maybe we use 1,000, right? We cut it in half. That would help us bring the unit capacity higher to match what actually exists today on the ground.
Yeah, or like setbacks potentially.
The setbacks is a tricky one. It actually doesn't, the model doesn't take into account setbacks directly. Setbacks are accounted for through the open space calculation in the model. But in theory, yes, just not from a modeling perspective. I mean, I would say with these zoning parameters, what you could tweak to bring the unit count up would be minimum lot coverage, so going from 20% to some higher number, or bringing down the lot area per dwelling unit from 2,000 to some lower number. That would help us do that if that's a desirable outcome.
I have a quick question. Is there a minimum lot frontage dimension? Doesn't seem to be one listed, but is that something that's in consideration? What would be a minimum dimension to allow this to be possible to, build within the 20%? Say it's 100 feet, some number. Because I know that sometimes can play a factor when the lot coverage is so small. If the frontage is so small, then you don't end up with any really space left to build.
Yep, that's a great question. So the MBTA compliance model doesn't take lot frontage requirements into account in a direct way, where let's say the model doesn't have the ability to look at this is not a great example, but let's say a really tightly built out block where the parcel sizes are 3,000 square feet with 50 feet of frontage or 40 feet of frontage. The model doesn't look at that. But what will happen is EOHLC, in their review of the zoning, they're going to look for things like, let's say someone tried to be tricky and set the minimum frontage requirement to 500 feet in a district where the parcels are 50 feet wide. They would look at that and say, it looks like you're trying to do something to, completely circumvent someone from doing something.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll come to public comment after the presentation.
The second district is the Shirley Street District, which is a very linear kind of single parcel district. between Shirley Street and the state route. So for this one, you can see the zoning parameters that we used. This district is split between Business District A and Residence District B zones. So we chose to run the model under the Resident B. We had to pick one in this instance. So we ran it under Resident B because the dimensional requirements are a little less flexible, a little more conservative in that district. So just to get a sense of what that would look like. So we ran it minimum lot size at 20,000 square feet, 3 stories in height, 30% lot coverage, setbacks 25 feet for the front, 25 feet for the side, 40 for the rear. Again, 2 parking spaces per unit and a lot area per dwelling unit of 2,500 square feet. So you might be asking yourself, for a district of 12.8 acres, how come the unit capacity is only 64 units? That number may strike you as very low. The thing that drives it very low here is the minimum lot size, again, of 20,000 square feet. That minimum lot size essentially makes 92% of the parcels we ran through the model non-compliant. Most of them are around 5,000, say 4,000 to 7,000 square feet in size, something like that, in the district that we ran. So by setting the minimum lot size at 20,000 square feet, the model says you can't build on that. It's a non-compliant lot. So it kicks them all out, and it only lets us model unit capacity on parcels that are at 20,000 square feet or higher. So in this district, if we wanted to encourage a higher unit capacity than 64, we would want to look at that 20,000 square foot minimum lot size and lower that. That would be one way of bringing the unit capacity up. If that's not desirable, then this would be a way to essentially minimize impacts in this district and get 64 units.
Just a question on that, if I could, Eric. 2 questions, I guess. One, you're saying your model kicks back lots that are under 20,000 square feet, doesn't calculate them in the unit density. Does that also mean that people couldn't develop those lots for the unit capacity? Is your model not showing what could be realized in this district under 3A? Right, like, so I guess, sorry, to say it differently, bunch of the parcels here, as you outlined, are 4,000 to 7,000 square feet. If someone were to buy 2 adjacent parcels, and you have a 14,000 square foot parcel, can I now develop multifamily on that parcel? Or because I'm under 20,000 square feet, you still cannot realize any of the 64 units?
Okay, now I understand your question. Thanks for the clarity. Appreciate it. So 2 answers to that, one from a model perspective, one from a reality perspective. In reality, if someone aggregated parcels in this district under this zoning and was able to assemble 20,000 square feet or more, then under your zoning regulations today in the bylaw, I would say they'd be able to do something. Under the model doesn't have the ability to aggregate parcels, so it has to run on an individual parcel by parcel basis. It is one limitation of the model, but there are so many permutations of how someone could aggregate parcels across 177 communities that
No,
they're really,
understood,
yeah. But anyway,
understood.
great question.
The second part of that, I guess, is this is in our town anyway, this is a long district you've outlined. Impactful on the streetscape along, the golf course and River Road, Veterans Road there. So it's got a lot of impact in the town, the length that you're showing. We're only realizing 64 units towards the model. If you reduce the lot size of Seal Harbor that you just walked us through, which is still 130 units short of existing capacity, could you still downzone Seal Harbor but allow us to get the 64 units out of that rather than even include this district? Is that,
Yeah,
is that a
totally.
lever to pull?
Yes, 100%.
Uh,
Or helpful to understand? the
Definitely.
push-pull.
Yes.
So if the mean parcel was, I don't know, if the mean parcel size was like 6,000 square feet or somewhere in there, if we zone to say, this is what we have, the minimum lot size should be that, whatever the kind of mean size is, how many units would we end up with?
Great question. I can, when we're done with the presentation, I have the model open, so I could quickly change the minimum parcel size, the minimum lot size from 20,000 to 6, and I could show you what that looks like.
So I asked if we change the minimum lot size to more closely reflect what's actually there, how many units we would end up with in the model.
Yep. So we can test that tonight if it's something you're interested in.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that because I think there's a lot of parcels between Shirley and Shore also that could potentially be included in this count if you downsize from 20,000 to 6,000 or 5. Can we do 5,000 even? Could we do 5,000? Could we minimum lot size?
Technically, you can do 0. You can do whatever you want. It's zoning.
Okay.
So it's whatever you think makes sense for your town.
I think so for the Shirley Street area, if we could give that a run and see what we come out with to extend to Shore Drive, that'd probably be interesting to see.
Sure. So for the 3rd district, the Governor's Park, we ran this under the Residence C garden apartment or attached dwelling complex zoning. Again, 20,000 square foot minimum lot size, 3-story height limit, lot coverage of 30%, open space requirement of 30%, setbacks at 25 feet for the front, 25 feet for the side, 40 feet for the rear, 2 spaces per unit for parking. In this one, the zoning today is a minimum lot area per dwelling unit of 2,500 square feet. But as I'll explain in a little bit, running the model the way we ran it before, we were short about 73 units or so to get to the 882. So given how many units are here today, about 351, we thought there might be some room here, similar to the discussion that we had in Seal Harbor, to just lower the lot area per dwelling unit from 2,500 square feet to 1,900. That allowed us to pick up the units that we needed to get to the 882. As we just heard and just discussed from members, there's so many ways in which we could make up those units. This was just our suggestion on how to do that. We're not married to anything. There's a lot of different ways we could do it, but that's the reason why that's asterisk is in the 1,900. We were just trying to play around and see like how could we make up those 70 some odd units that we needed. So you could see the modeled unit capacity here is 341. Existing, there's 351. So here we're a little more closely matched than we are in Seal Harbor, and the density is above the 15 dwelling units an acre that we need. Okay, so now to the most complex one, the Central Business District. I'll first start with just running the Central Business District through the MBTA model, recognizing that what I think I heard from folks when we were here the last time was there might be a desire to not have this be a 3A district because it is your town center and it does have commercial, very successful first floor commercial or standalone commercial development, and there might be a desire to sort of leave that alone. So we've looked at 2 different options here, one that sort of does that and one that doesn't. This is the one that doesn't. So just under this, just to give you an idea, so we could have a discussion about it. Under this modeling scenario, we would make multifamily housing as of right. So someone could come in and do just a multifamily housing project as of right in the district. We did run everything that's in all the parcels that are in purple. We did run this using the 2.5-story restriction where lots abut residential properties. So you can see the hatching around the exterior of the district. That's all the existing CBD parcels that abut residential. Those are all run at the zoning parameters you see in the table on the left-hand side. 5,000 square foot minimum lot size, 2.5-story height limit, 90% max lot coverage, 0 front yard setback, 10-foot side yard, and 15-foot rear with 1 parking space per unit. Under the parcels that are not hatched, we ran that under the CBD 4-story. So same 5,000 square foot minimum lot size, 4-story height limit, 90% lot coverage, same. The setbacks vary a little bit in that district. You have a 0 foot side yard setback and then 1 space per parking unit. So we took all the parcels, we ran them separately through those 2 different zoning parameters, and we came up with a unit capacity of 515 units and a density of 32.4. Again, a much higher density than what you need, and actually pretty high unit capacity. Existing, from what we could tell, there's about 103 units on these parcels, but again, we're just trying to confirm that, so hold that number for the time being. So under this scenario, this would envision,
Just, Eric, I think as you run your analysis, it's probably more useful to understand what could be built, units that could be built there today under current zoning, rather than what maybe exists there today in this case. Right, Seal Harbor and Governor's Park were good comps that they're permitted. They were permitted by way of special permit. They allowed for more density than our zoning would allow them to build today. So they're essentially existing non-conforming in some capacity. So to see what exists there versus what MBTA 3A would allow is helpful. I think for CBD, it'd be helpful for this analysis to know what the unit count that could be built is versus what the capacity under 3A is, right? And by that, they're slightly different. Our CBD requires ground floor commercial, requires parking spaces, and then has setback requirements, height requirements that are baked into zoning. So there is a capacity we could fit there, and that's different than the 103 that maybe exists there. If that makes sense, just to see that data point in the future.
okay. I may come back and ask some questions about that after we get through the next slide, just so I'm crystal clear on
Okay.
what you want to do. Okay, so this scenario would envision we take the CBD district and we would allow multifamily as of right, and it would become one of your 3A compliant districts. And again, that's a choice. Secondarily, there's another choice, which I think I mentioned the last time I was here. Back in August of 2023, HLC amended the guidelines to allow for what's called a mandatory mixed-use district. And effectively, this tries to recognize the housing potential in a community's, typically a downtown or a town center district, where they're really trying to encourage mixed use by saying, in order to unlock housing on the upper stories, a property owner or a developer has to build first floor commercial if they want to build housing in the district. So you have that today through your zoning. So what we did was we modeled the CBD as it is today. We ran it through the mandatory mixed use modeling process. We sent that to HLC because they have to pre-approve any district. They have pre-approved it. They fast-tracked it for us, so thank you to them. So if you want to go this direction, it is approved, and we could go this direction. What this does is we have to go through a process of saying, okay, what is your total unit capacity required in all of Winthrop? That's 882. We take your zoning parameters for the CBD, and we run it through the mixed-use model. The only difference here is we have to take 1 story of height off of the maximum height, because we're saying one of those stories, the ground floor story, can't be housing in a mandatory mixed-use district. So in the hatched area, instead of 2.5 stories, we ran that under 1.5. The not hatched, where you allow 4 stories, ran that under 3. So that's why the unit capacity shrinks. Keep all the other zoning parameters the same. We end up with a modeled unit capacity of 343 instead of the 515 that we showed before. We have to do a comparison according to the regulations to say, is 343 greater than or less than 25% of the town's unit requirement? 25% of 882 is 221. We compare the modeled capacity of 343 against 25% of your unit capacity, and if you want to use this as a mixed-use district, we have to take the lesser of the two. So that's how we end up with 221. 221 being 25% of your total unit capacity is less than what we modeled at 343. That's the rules and regulations that we have to follow per the guidelines if we want to use this. The other option is we use this as a 3A district and you allow multifamily as of right, and you can get to the 515 or whatever zoning parameters you want us to run. So that's kind of the two choices. If you want to sort of preserve this district as your mixed use and leave it alone, the nice thing is we can use this as an offset and say, hey, instead of 221, now in all of your actual 3A districts, you need 661. And nothing's going to change here. People, property owners, developers, they can just operate under the existing zoning rules that you have today, and we don't have to worry about 3A in your CBD, and we get credit for 221 units of zoning capacity, essentially. So in all those other districts that we just talked about, Shirley, Seal Harbor, Governor's Park, any other districts you want us to look at, there we need to find 661. Does that make sense?
Very helpful.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. So just to wrap up, this doesn't show the MMU offset that we just talked about. This just shows the table that we looked at the very beginning. So depending on how you want to slice and dice this, I think there are ways to get to compliance in a pretty quick and minimal way, just from a modeling standpoint. I wanted to mention too, if we use the CBD for the 221 unit offset, and we make that slight change in Governor's Park, where we go down to 1,900 square feet per unit, we can reach a unit capacity of 892, about 10 more than you would need.
And that includes the Shirley district with 64 units?
Correct. So if you wanted to get rid of Shirley and try to find that additional unit capacity in one of these other two districts or some other district that you want us to test, that's on the table too.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak for myself in this. I think that I'd say very helpful. I think that what we're trying to do is comply with the zoning ordinance with the least impact to the community. I mean, I think we hear the comments, and to stay eligible for grant money, our task as a planning board is to kind of find a path forward that we can recommend. To take credit for the CBD as it exists today with no zoning change is a helpful path. I don't think we knew that as an option a year ago. If we could benefit from both Seal Harbor and Governor's Park and their existing unit count by overlaying on top of it, essentially making development infeasible there. In saying that, I think Seal Harbor to reduce the minimum lot size to see if we can gain those 64 units and eliminate Shirley Street, I think that'd be the least impactful way. The only area you'll see true development is the area that I think we all knew that we would to some capacity anyway, which is the CBD. I mean, I guess I'm of the opinion, I'll let the board speak, but I'm of the opinion that using the MMU overlay should be our path. I think having a walkable retail node is kind of a common vernacular for a seaside New England town. If we lose that, and if we get rid of that anyway for 3A, people will build parking on the ground floor and residential above, and we'll kind of lose the retail node that we're slowly starting to see, really take shape there. And I think it'd be a miss to offer relief from that through 3A. I'll let the board ask other questions, but I think exploring both the combination of Seal Harbor, Governor's Park with the MMU overlay and seeing if that can get us to that 661 additional units or 882 total would be a great path to see. Any other questions from the board, I think, before we go to public comment?
I mean, just from my opinion, I'd like, again, what I said before, to see the Shirley Street extended to shore, just because the intent behind 3A was to be on a bus route, so closer to a transit route, and so Governor's Park is a bit off the beaten path. So that's just where I'm standing. Or sorry, not Governor, sorry. The other one, the one up the hill.
Seal Harbor.
Seal Harbor. Thank you.
So I do think that changing putting the CBD into a full MBTA district would just basically turn it into another residential district, and it would end up as a residential district with parking on the first floor and not at all walkable. And I think that's kind of a complete miss and opposite everything that the town has built on and encouraging, and a nice little town center. I think that would kind of undo that. So from my perspective, I'd prefer to see combinations that would use that as the MMD number instead.
Anything else before you open it up, public comment?
Can I just clarify? I want to make sure I heard you right on the central business district. In order to get the credit that you applied for and got approved, we don't have to make any existing changes to the zoning regulations in the CBD? Did I hear that right?
Yep, that's true. Our zoning consultant, Emily Ennis, is going through the town's existing bylaw now, just to double check that there isn't any other kind of red flags or some kind of like hidden special permit requirement that got tucked in there at some point over the decades, just to make sure, because HLC and the AG's office are doing relatively thorough reviews of existing zoning bylaws. So we are going to do that. So hopefully I reserve the right to come back and say we may, there's something we missed. One thing that's a great point. One thing that HLC did flag for me, and I went back and looked at it, is in the CBD, there is a parking regulation where I think there's a parking reduction that can be offered by a special permit for not doing first floor commercial parking. Like that can be waived through special permit.
In our CBD or something?
Yeah.
There's a provision where you can buy out of.
That's what it is.
Parking
The
spaces.
fee in lieu. The
Fee in lieu of.
Yes.
So for every space you want to reduce, you pay $20,000.
Yes.
To the town.
So because that's in there and it requires a special permit, one thing I did want to ask the planning board was, would you consider shifting that to part of like site plan review, or do you feel strongly that that needs to be special permit? I don't need an answer right now, just something to think about, because HLC did flag that.
So essentially saying we could not have a special, anything that requires a special permit provision in the CBD otherwise.
Yeah.
So would a workaround essentially be to say you have to provide your parking on site and ground floor commercial?
Yeah, because
because otherwise it's, the town, in my opinion, isn't benefiting if people have a variance to get out of parking, don't pay to any communal fund for their parking loss.
Understood.
And then there's more housing units in CBD that are forced to park someplace. So
if they can, they have the option of providing the parking on site without the special permit. So does that count? Because they don't have to get the special permit for that.
So the biggest challenge that was flagged is in the MMU, when we run the model, the state put a provision in the guidelines for running the MMU that you can't require parking for the first floor commercial. So the way I tried to pitch it to HLC was I said, hey, even though there is a requirement, there's a way to get out of that requirement through the fee in lieu. And they said, okay, we'll buy into that because there's a way out of it if you pay the $20,000 per space. But they said the way we'll let you do that is get rid of the special permit. So it's not like a special permit barrier for someone who has to get that approval.
I see. So you're saying we as a planning board wouldn't have a determination to say you're paying $40,000 to reduce 2 spaces. You simply pay the fee on your own without a special permit?
Yes, but so the regulation is totally, or the requirement, or not the option for the developer or property owner to utilize that fee in lieu is totally fine.
Without our option to deny it.
Yeah, it's the special permit piece.
I follow.
Yeah. So if there's consideration to moving that away from a special permit to site plan review or part of that process, I think HLC would say that's totally fine.
Okay. Sorry to belabor the point a bit, but is it possible then to eliminate special permit for ground floor commercial, allowing them to pay the fee, but keep a requirement for all residential parking,
You can have a,
not buy out of residential parking?
yep, yep. So the regulation really pertains to the first floor commercial.
Got it.
Or actually any commercial use in the building. It could be on the second floor, wherever it is.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Okay.
That's the sort of hurdle that we have to overcome with that, it's really the special permit. So, yeah, however, the planning board would recommend addressing that. I just think we need to just find some quick way to address that.
Yep. Okay, I think we see a path.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, did you have something else to say, Eric?
I'm sorry, I know the public's probably getting very itchy, and I appreciate their patience. Will there be time for me to circle back on questions with the planning board, or do you want me to do that now or later?
I think maybe before public comment, we can address some of them now. If
Okay,
easiest.
I think they'll be quick.
Yep.
So for Shirley Avenue, is that something that the planning board would like me to explore? The comment from the member about trying to shrink the lot sizes from 20,000 to something else and see what that looks like, or should we move forward with the suggestion from the chair? I just want to make sure I'm clear on what you all want to see.
Just to get the totals. I obviously would to get the totals, but it's more to you guys. I would like to move forward with that to get the totals. How about you guys?
I think let's see it as an option. It'd be helpful to see an option if you reduce the unit size. I guess I'm of the opinion that it'd be helpful to see if we can add unit capacity to our zoning for Seal Harbor, where we're far under, and show an option that we don't include the Shirley Street corridor at all.
Yep. Yep.
But we should see both, but we can
Okay,
discuss.
that's helpful. We'll work on that.
Confirm the area again? Okay. Hello? Okay. I'd like to confirm the minimum lot size area again. Did we say 5,000 square feet, or it was based on 20, right, initially? We want to go down to 5,000 and do that
Yep.
study?
So,
Yeah.
so the 20,000 is the minimum. I can answer that with all confidence.
Okay.
Where we need to change the minimum from 20,000 to something lesser, we'll just need to look in the model to see what the average, like what a typical unit size is. It's somewhere in that like 5,000 to 7,000 square foot range. That'll probably get us a lot more conforming parcels if we can lower that unit, the
Okay.
minimum lot size.
All right, thank you.
And then to the chair, just your comment about the CBD zoning. Did my second slide on the MMU, is that more in line with what you were talking about around like the zoning efforts that the town had gone through?
I think that answered my question without having to do further work from your end. My question was, essentially, if I'm saying this correctly, it looks like with the MMU, by your analysis, our CBD today, if fully developed, would be able to yield 343 units.
Yes, per the MBTA compliance model, yes. In reality, it may be a little less or a little more, but generally that's probably in the realm.
All right, so then that's helpful. I think
Yeah.
I'll still ask for that work then. So what I'd like to see is, under today's zoning, and we can try this on our end a little bit to help you out, how many units, if the CBD was fully developed today, could that district yield, regardless of 3A? And I think that's a barometer to understand what the MBTA MMU zoning, how it differs.
Gotcha.
I just think that's a good benchmark to weigh against. Because I'm interpreting your MMU essentially to say, no changes to CBD. It's built as originally contemplated in our zoning ordinance, and we take credit for 221 units, therefore reducing our overall demand to 661.
Right. But I would say that 343 is based on a parcel by parcel build out that the MBTA model did based on the zoning that I just shared with you all in that table.
Got it.
So I think that's what you're asking for, but I'm
yep.
not 100% sure. Just want to make sure.
Yep, I think we're there.
Okay.
I think we're there.
Good.
That's helpful.
Thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, before we open up to public comment, I think we've heard the discourse in town. I think we know the sentiment of the room. So try to keep your comments about 3 minutes. I think ask questions. If there's questions, you can direct them to me, and we can see how much we want to engage RKG. As you can probably tell, we're desiring to zone this for the least impact to the town. I mean, essentially that when developers come in, if they were to purchase Seal Harbor, they'll realize that under 3A, they get no benefit. They get 100 less units than they experience today, right? So these are some notable moments of progress from RKG, so we appreciate their work. Try to be respectful of each other when you make comments. And please step up to the microphone. Just say your name and your district.
Hi, Cheryl Howard, Precinct 2. So I have a question about overlaying on the condos. So they're individually owned. So if you overlay 3A over a condo, does the 3A zoning supersede like the condo docks there? So can somebody purchase a unit, gut it, and like make 4 bedrooms out of 2 bedrooms? Is that something that can happen if it's now in a 3A zone? So I'm just confused about that.
I'll let RKG kind of answer this, but essentially this is a land, zoning is a land use designation.
Yep.
So the land can yield a certain density.
Yep.
That doesn't supersede condo docks. If condos prevent you from renovating that unit and make it 3 bedrooms, the condo docks will live. Existing.
Will.
Yep.
Okay.
So there'll be no real change to
Okay.
anything that exists in your condo docks. This is just an overlay for land use capacity. But I don't know if RKG wanted to. Yep. So I mean, this is I don't know, a good comparison, right? But if we had an adult use, they call it overlay, right? So you could have different shops or commercial space that adult use. You can overlay that in our CBD and just grab a couple of buildings. It doesn't change existing zoning. It doesn't change anything else. It just adds uses and options to that. That won't change Seal Harbor's condo docks at all. It won't change what exists there today. This is just an overlay to comply with 3A.
Okay. My other comment is I've asked council to schedule a public meeting to meet with all our department heads, because I do think that their voices are the most important voices in our town, and I don't think anybody should be making any decisions until they have weighed in on impacts on our land. So I do hope that the council listens and sets up that meeting so that you all and we all can hear what our department heads have to say. They're our people. They take care of us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is, can you hear me? My name is Carol Ficella, and I'm an owner at Seal Harbor. So this is a lot of information to absorb, and I couldn't read any of the slides. So I do want to know specifically what the impact will be on us as owners at Seal Harbor with the proposed changes. I don't hear the specificity. You've said some things about this is land as opposed to individual condos. So what will be the impact on us if we're in that zone as owners of that property? What could be done in the future that would have a negative or adverse impact on us? Because I think we need, as residents, to understand that fully before we can support this kind of proposal. So if you could explain that, that would be very helpful.
I'll let Eric take a stab. Maybe you'll say it better than I will.
Sure. So what we're trying to do, and let's take Seal Harbor as a perfect example, is try to create the zoning regulations for this MBTA overlay district. Let's say it gets put over Seal Harbor, that very closely, if not exactly, matches the zoning that's there today on the ground, that, you know, obviously through a different mechanism like a special permit allowed that development to take place years ago when it occurred. So what we want to do with the overlay is to try to match that zoning such that, and I hope this never ever happens, but it's the only way I can talk about it, something catastrophic happens. A hurricane comes through and blows the whole thing down, levels everything. Someone could come and put the same number of units back that existed before. That's what we're trying to do. One of the added protections and or challenges with putting it over a condo is in order for someone to purchase that and do something different maybe in the future, they'd have to get every single owner to agree, right, to sell. I imagine you live there, that would be really, really hard to do. So putting it over condos is another way in which many communities have chosen to minimize the impact of the 3A district.
So the individual condo units will not be impacted because this is a land issue.
Exactly.
Could some of that land, we have a lot of land in that area, could a parcel of that be carved off and then a new building go up on that property? Could that be a possibility?
I mean, again, I think that would, I don't know what's in your condo docs or the ownership agreement, but I imagine it would take everybody to agree to that or to the board to agree to that. So I think that would be one potential hurdle. I suppose somebody could subdivide it and do something different, but we'd try to minimize it through the zoning, what could happen there.
Okay, so they would have to, so, all right. The one building you're including, which is not actually Seal Harbor, is that Pond Street building, which is not owned by condo people, but it's an apartment building. So if this is part of that zone, could literally that owner of that apartment building, again, make changes that would have an impact on all 3 units, or all 3 buildings?
Potentially, but again, we would try to set the zoning such to mirror what's on that parcel
Okay.
so that they couldn't,
Couldn't just sell it out and then have a different,
Right.
different building.
Right.
And our condo docs protect us, that this law does not supersede those condo docs.
Correct.
Okay, very good. One other question I had, we're kind of assuming with all of this presentation that we're moving forward in this direction. I still would like to know, there are 177 communities impacted. Some have agreed, but many are opposing. Have we considered as a town what that nature of the opposition? By looking at that law, there seems to be a lot of constitutional issues which could be challenged. It's an overreach in the law, it's an overbreadth in the law, it's very punitive excessively if we don't comply, the consequences of state funding. I think there are a lot of legalities in this law that we're not even addressing. And I would just urge the community to look at other communities, work together with them, because if there is a lawsuit and we don't want this zoning, we should be considered part of that lawsuit, and we should be getting legal counsel that supports our town. I'm disappointed. So the first is taking court action to challenge. Any law can be challenged constitutionally, and I think there are, I'm a novice, but I think there are definitely constitutional grounds to challenge this law. Secondly, I think legislators have been negligent in supporting their constituents. Comments by Lydia Edwards, her meeting that showed up in the transcript of May 23rd, she did not mention once any of the negative impacts in her communities regarding this law. She was all gung-ho this law. She's not representing us as constituents, and I think that's negligent on her part. We need a legislator who's going to represent and hear the voice of the community and respond to our concerns. And I just feel we're going to get steamrolled over this. And again, some of his proposals, Eric, it made some good sense. But I don't think we should just de facto assume that this is a given. I think we need to consider some of the options that we have as a community and to unite with others. Thank you.
Vasily Malios, Precinct 1. Chris, do you mind explaining what site plan review is, if you don't mind?
Sure. Anytime a project comes to the town, planning board only really has purview over CBD. So CBD, downtown district area, we will look at design, we'll look at parking ratios, we'll look at height and area setbacks, zoning compliance. A typical development that happens in town doesn't come before the planning board often, unless it's in an SDOD, which is a special district overlay. Otherwise, it goes through site plan review, which is a combination of the building inspector, the fire department, the local police, Concom, anybody who would have commentary on the sustainable impacts or environmental or community impacts of a project.
Would that include the public's voices as well?
Sure. Public comment well, public comment isn't a part of site plan review. That happens with the building department.
Okay.
Just like a building permit doesn't have a public comment, but this is the moment.
So within a 3A zone, do we have a voice still?
Of course.
As
Yeah.
the community, would we still be able, for example, if a developer does come in and wants to develop, do we still have a voice to fight, to fight against it?
My understanding, and Eric can answer, my understanding is if we were to zone any area as 3A, it allows for, site plan review would happen, but it allows otherwise for no special permits, and it's as of right zoning.
So you guys would just check the boxes, and then if it clears, they got the go-ahead. Is
Essentially,
that correct?
essentially, it's as of right zoning. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Can you say yes or no if the guidelines are set in stone as is right now? Will they change later on down the line?
I have absolutely no idea. I don't work for this.
Could they?
Sure, anything's possible.
Okay, so the guidelines could change later on down the line, which means then we would then have to comply with those guidelines within those 3A zones?
I have no idea.
Most likely the answer is yes. That is the biggest thing with this. Once we say yes, we then have to follow whatever the guidelines say. If the guidelines change, we have to adhere to them. We then also need to ask permission to the state if we want to make changes to that zone. Is that correct? I know the answer is yes. So I think that's really concerning. I would think if, as you guys as planning board members, the first question you should ask yourself is if you agree with the law. If you say no, you should put a stop to this. There are 3 lawsuits right now. There are 3 lawsuits right now. The state is suing Milton, and then there are civil suits that the residents of several communities, I believe it's 18 plus, Winthrop is one of them, suing the state over the constitutionality of this. I think the planning board should look into this aspect. I think you guys should put this to a stop. We have a December 31st deadline, and I think you guys should wait and see what the court has to say. And if you do move forward with it, and if the town council does vote for it, we probably will take this to a townwide vote. Thank you.
Hi, Cassie Whithouse, District 6. I'm glad people are asking questions about condo associations and stuff like that. I know that's something that people are worried about, and that was good information to have. Can we set height limits? I know there was some stuff that was in there about the limitations that can be included and like lot setbacks and all of that. So like that would be something that they would have to, if somebody were to come in and build, they would have to comply with those limitations that are set as part of the code already.
It's an overlay district, so base zoning is what they'd have to comply with. We're not making any changes to the base zone.
So height limitations that exist.
So
they
in
would have
residential
to
A
say-
districts, it's 35 feet. So they'd have to comply with a 35-foot tall building.
Okay. And I do live in District 6, and a lot of the neighborhoods that I've looked at, I think, have like 18 units an acre. So I definitely think that that would be a great neighborhood where there are some like older single-family homes that are in really, really bad shape, and like maybe 2 or 3 units would be built there, but otherwise like the community feel is like already triple deckers. So yeah, thank you.
Hi, Celeste Rivera, Hewitt, Precinct 1. I have a couple of questions. First off, is the desired outcome of this exercise on behalf of the consultants to be just to deliver up the ideal model to comply, or is there an opportunity to also deliver up an alternative model? I know there's been a lot of feedback on the actual usable area, the most recent town council meeting. There was a lot of talk about flood zones and areas that would be really compromised in terms of additional development and dwelling. So potential opportunity to recalculate the number of units.
I would just say, I know that there's discussions ongoing, town manager and town council are part of, to try to reduce our area, take credit for the Winthrop area that's out Logan Airport. That's not in our path. If we are successful, that will reduce our unit count. And then we, as a planning board, our mission, and we appreciate everybody's comments, our mission is to try to find a model that complies with the least impact to the community, hearing what the community wants, make that recommendation to town council. Town council and our legal representation will kind of take it from there, right? So that's our path. If we get word that Logan Airport, land can be subtracted from our total land area and we can reduce the units, we'll build that into the model for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it behooves us, I know that there's been some opportunities to communicate with the secretary, and I think it behooves us to also, in parallel to this exercise, come up with an alternative response, kind of a common sense response, if it will. I also think that one of the biggest concerns is that we're going to end up with maximum density projects, so with numbers like 20,000 square feet, plot sizes and that kind of thing. That's a little bit scary to folks, because the only people that's going to be accessible to are going to be developers. I work in development, so the language of we have to charge rates, certain rates, certain fees in order to make it worth our while to develop. I would be really reluctant to endorse a situation where we're putting ourselves in a position to add housing where it's being whispered as an accessibility and affordability initiative and making it far from that, and also to reducing the quality of life, not only current residents, but the residents we're hoping to attract. I think it's two board members asking about the modeling based on 5,000 square feet. I think we're going in the same direction because current single-unit housing is a 5,000 square feet zoning. Two-unit housing is 6,000 square feet. If we reduce the 2,000 requirement to 5,000 square feet as of right across the town, we almost meet that 15 unit per square acre goal, right, that the state has for us, and then that fosters more organic opportunity to develop. If I want an accessory unit for my children, or for income, or for other folks here, because one of the big questions is, how does this make it worth our while? How does this protect us, right? We're not conceding to excessive zoning. If we serve that up and say, look, we more than exceed your goal of 880 some odd units for us by making this simple change to our zoning, and we also keep things civil and common sense for here and keep the majority of the town out of harm's way. So that's what I recommend. Thank you.
My name's Donna Moulton McDade. I'm Precinct 3. This is going to sound like a silly question, but it's really not meant to be. If the MBTA is telling us that we have to do this, why are we giving these apartments parking spots? Honestly, I don't understand that. And I also want to know if any consideration has been given to what this is going to do to our schools, what's it going to do to the traffic around here. So, thank you.
Hi, Suzanne Swope. Oh, I'm sorry. Suzanne Swope, Precinct 4. Can you tell me, if you use Seal Harbor as well as Governor's Park as an overlay, how short are we to the 882?
Under the zoning parameters that we ran, that we
Yes.
showed tonight? Give me a minute, I can add it up.
Okay.
Looks like maybe about 54
54?
with the CBD offset of 221 units. Yeah, be 54.
Thank you.
Peter Gill, Precinct 5. Does this proposal that you've made, does that satisfy the 884? In other words, do we have to build anything? Do we have to allow anything to be built?
To answer it simply, Peter, the proposal that we talked about tonight that we saw, if you were thinking about what you would see built, you'd see a continued evolution of the CBD no different than the evolution that we're planning on seeing anyway down there, right? So that's where you'd see new construction.
Okay,
You don't have to build any of the units anyway.
it sounded like if this plan passed, was acceptable, that we would not have to add any units in town. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, to try to answer it the best way, Eric might be better at it, but I would say that both Governor's Park and Seal Harbor would satisfy over 600 of our required units, or close to 600 of our required units, and you wouldn't have to build anything to meet that requirement. The rest of the units are met by leaving CBD zoning in place untouched. So could you see new growth in CBD? Yes, but no different than what our current zoning contemplates.
So the state had said we needed 800 and something units, but we're saying that we don't need 800 new units, and it's up to the state now to determine whether or not the units that have already been built qualify.
No, so since it's a land use overlay, we're simply choosing to overlay the land use on areas that already have more units than 3A contemplates. So, if the state was saying we want to see you zoned for 882 units, we're saying we have 2 areas plus CBD that already have that many units, and our overlay is just going to go right there, and you won't see a change. That's the intent of what we're
There'd be so many unanswered questions here that the effect of this, and I won't go over the safety things and the school things and the traffic things. I had asked the council in an open session to say no now. Just stop all this baloney and all this uncertainty and just say no now. Like the people in Milton did. And now all the state has to do is, well, only Milton and maybe 2 other communities. So all the other communities are happy about this. Well, let's join the people that are unhappy about it. Let's have some courage and say no.
Hi, Kathleen Capuccio, 49 Waldemar Ave. I always forget my precinct. First, I do want to thank the planning board. I understand that you guys are just doing your job, so I respect that you guys volunteer to do this. So I do just want to say thank you for doing that. I do want to just piggyback a little bit on what Vasily said with respect to the guidelines. The big issue here, again, the fact of the matter is, I think our town council will sadly vote to comply. We will go to a townwide election, and we will, as a town, vote to not comply. My guess is by 3-1. Sadly, I think that's the road it's going to go. We're not going to do this nonsense. It's sad we have to go through this process, but we do. But with respect to the guidelines have been changed 4 times since this legislation has been passed. If we vote to comply, who knows how those guidelines will be amended? So we are absolutely, positively giving over control to the state for these guidelines to be changed and amended again. So even when we vote, whether it be, again, let's say when the planning board votes, when the town council then votes, when this winds up probably coming to a townwide election, we actually don't know what we're voting on. We know as a town what areas maybe we're voting on, but we have no idea how these guidelines can change again. And that's why Milton and others have taken this to the SJC, because of the constitutionality of the law. So there's a big issue with that. So again, if we vote to comply, we actually don't know what we're voting to comply with. This is a hard no. Hard no.
Jean Murray, Precinct 6. Has anyone done an impact study on the traffic in town if this takes place? Because I'm already getting really nervous about Suffolk Downs. And how many units are they putting in there? They've got that big apartment building. There's 2 cars with every unit. You can't get in and out of town now, any time of day. It used to be a certain time of day.
it would be slow, but now it's impossible. And if there's a storm, you can't get out at all. So I think that's a very real problem. And I think it should be weighed heavily. Thank you.
Susan Griffiths, Precinct 5. My question is for you. Are there any other peninsulas that are the size of Winthrop, 1.6 miles, that have been given the number of 882 units?
I don't know. I would have to look.
177 communities. We have to know how many on a bus line, not on a train line. Is there any other peninsula? Is that being taken into account for that we're trapped here? We're in a different scenario. East Boston is in charge of one light, Revere is in charge of the other light. Those lights both red at the same time, Winthrop can't leave. 882 additional units at potentially 4 people, 2 cars. Forget the overcrowding that is another whole issue of the schools. But why isn't our town looking at it, being looked at for its uniqueness? This is not a one-size-fits-all. This is a very unique community.
I'm going to try to clarify one thing that Eric could probably correct me on if I'm wrong, but the way this study that Eric presented tonight is showing is that we're talking about, I heard a lot of comments on new units being produced. The only new units you'd see would be in CBD. Otherwise, it'd be a reduction in units if you were to build anything. So Seal Harbor Governor's Park, you'd see net zero change, no traffic impact change to those two at all, 600 units complying with state law with no new units being built. The new units you'd see built would be CBD. So we'd be complying with state law with only 200 units, 221 units, right? So I just want to clarify the difference between land use overlay zoning and actual like construction and building. I mean, they're very different in this scenario.
Joe Aiello, Precinct 5. So first of all, thank you for such a dramatically different presentation than we got in January, which was barely understandable. This was helpful. So thank you. I couldn't see, maybe it's my eyesight, I couldn't see a lot of the details here, but I want to go back to the chairman's discussion. My takeaway is that with the exception of 64 units on Shirley Street, potentially, that in this town, under this plan, we're not building any additional units that weren't already rezoned for in the center. So that zoning happened in 2020, I believe. Is that about the right year?
I think 2013 was the first pass, and then
2013 was the first pass and came through. So those units, if 3A were to disappear tomorrow, if the courts would decide that it's unconstitutional, that zoning still stands, and so 90% of what you're talking about are things that are likely to happen over the long term in the center. My question on Shirley Street, having real trouble figuring out the graphics. We were told by a couple of past town council presidents that we also rezoned the Shirley Street waterfront area, and that area can potentially accommodate 250 units. That's what was described to us at the council. And I'm wondering if that's a fact, that happened again in 2012-13, why that zoning can't be counted for fulfillment since it's already zoned instead of rezoning Shirley Street. So you don't have to answer it today, but
I don't know if Eric has an answer yet, or maybe need time to study that.
Yeah, we can look at any other district that's of interest to the town. So if there's another area that is already zoned for that level of unit capacity, I'm happy to look at it.
yeah, that would be helpful, because then you wouldn't even need to do anything on Shirley Street, and basically everything that previous town councils have rezoned for nothing would change from that. I do think, let me make a general comment, I do think and I don't know if it's the planning board or whomever, again, imagining 3A disappears, we're still looking at roughly 250 units in the center. We're still looking at 250 units over on Shirley Street on the waterfront over the long term. That means more population, means more traffic, et cetera. So there are a couple of dimensions of the problem. From a mobility perspective, one of the things that the town manager is doing is seeking money from CZM for a vulnerability mobility analysis. So we're going to be able to look at those issues about how to get in and out of Winthrop, how to improve it, how to get rid of the public safety elements of that. And there are various alternatives that are going to be considered. But the second is the question about the impact those new units would have on the town budgets. And there's been a lot of speculation. As I go to meetings in both directions, some people think that this is a big solve for the financial problems that the town has. Other people think it's going to worsen the situation. This is not my area of expertise, but my understanding is that there's a tool called something like a municipal fiscal impact analysis that looks at new growth and then projects the cost imposed by that new growth as well as the revenues that come from that new growth, and could tell us directionally what we should prepare for from a budgetary perspective as we go through year to year. Is that kind of analysis being considered as we go through this study? Even though it's only tangentially related to 3A, I think it would just help people sort of get a sense of fiscal impacts, which is an important consideration in this town, in addition to the traffic and public safety. Thank you.
Hi there. Lisa Alberghini, Precinct 6. Excuse me. I wanted to first thank you for this productive conversation and information. I think that I also was confused by what came out earlier in January, so it's good to get another, some more information and perspective. My sense and understanding is that there are actually several options for how we currently, with our zoning changes, going back to some of the ones that Councilor Aiello just mentioned, that we're very close to complying, if we don't already comply. And there were I know that you looked at the CBD change, but there were some that go back a little bit earlier that I think put us in a position of probably being very close to compliance. I actually think of this as Winthrop having been proactive over the past decade plus to try to rezone, and the rest of the Commonwealth is catching up with us. So I think it's a matter of the narrative being quite different than what it's unfolded to be. I also think, unfortunately, that analysis wasn't done early on during a window when it may have been able to be done, and that's led to a lot of angst for people and misinformation, because I do think we probably comply or are reasonably close to compliance. So I would also ask for you to look further back, and so that we can create the case to the state that we, in fact, have been proactive. It is a little bit of catch up on all the other municipalities' parts, and see how close we are. It sounds like at a minimum we might be just 54 units away if you were to make the kind of minor edits or tweaks that you've talked about tonight. I actually think we're probably, even maybe closer than that. The other thing I would say is that, I'd really like to see a real energy going toward understanding this better, putting forward that case now that could have been, probably should have been put forward in the fall and in the spring. I also, one of the gentlemen said, let's wait to see what the court says. I actually don't think it's unconstitutional, and have you looked into this? And probably we're better off, waiting to see how the court rules on that before we spend a lot of legal and other effort heading down a path that may not be relevant. Instead, spend that energy, trying to understand really what was done proactively by the planning board in the past, and how close we really are there. I'm a supporter of the law. I know a lot of people aren't, but I'm a supporter of the law. I would say let's think about what's the next step, if maybe you could help with this. What's the next step in trying to kind of set the record straight and provide updated and more accurate information on our, current, how we currently comply or how close we are. So sorry for the long way of getting to the question, but if you could tell us what's next, that would be great. Thank you.
Do you want to take next step, Eric?
Sure. So I think just in terms of the work, we've got 2 additional model runs to do where we're looking at Seal Harbor and Seal Harbor and Governors in combination with the CBD offset, and then taking a second look at Shirley Ave and the lot sizes and what can be done there. So I think that would be our next step. And I was going to ask through the chair at the end when you'd like to see us again. Because
I think as of right now, July 16th is our next meeting together.
First of all, lifelong Winthrop resident, Jack Dowd, lived in the town for 70 years. I did ask a question for the consultant last week. Sir, and you said you'd get back to me on the question?
Could you what was the question, Jack?
What was the
question?
What was the question?
Just try to interrupt.
He said
Let's
again-
try to be respectful of everybody's comments.
You said you'd get back to me on the question. Do you remember the question?
I do not remember the question. Could you please repeat it?
I'll repeat myself.
Thank
because,
you.
A lot of information gets lost here, especially if you look for the information in the minutes that committees and commissions have. So the question was, that was the first question a couple weeks ago. If you designate Shirley Street, not Shirley Ave, Shirley Street in Winthrop, as an area that you would give to the state as a district, even if it's in a flood zone, would they accept that?
Thank you for reminding me. I did follow up on that question. So 2 pieces to that. Yes, they would accept that. Flood zones are not currently part of excluded land. The second piece to that is we would need to look in the flood zones of how your local bylaw regulates that. Some communities require a special permit to have building happen in the floodplain or the flood zone. So we just need to look in the bylaw because, as you know, if it has a special permit, that's an added hurdle.
Thank you. Winthrop's structures, half of them are in a flood zone. Right, so that was determined last week. Half of them are in a flood zone. The 3A says that they want to build in a family-oriented location. I don't think a family-oriented location is in a flood zone. Also, there's a structure right now being built, and they went over the 50% limit. Maybe it's state, maybe it's federal, I'm not sure. That if you're going to build in a flood zone, you have to put the structure at a certain height above the flood zone. Does that pertain to any structures that you're talking about?
If it's in the federal, state, or local regulations, 3A doesn't supersede those regulations, so they would need to look at those regulations and follow what those say.
Thank you. It wasn't mentioned, that's why I brought it up.
Yep, no problem.
I'm very tired of going through these meetings. I don't think they're necessary. We should come to some type of conclusion. I heard a lot of, we wish for this, maybe that, type of talk here from many different people. And so I want to know when this is going to culminate into some type of final decision. Do we have to go through another process like this in a couple of weeks? Will the state, in your opinion, accept what you're talking about at this meeting tonight?
There's no final determination being made tonight.
When is
Just
the
to be
final,
clear.
when is
We have
the
another meeting
final-
in July. We'll see we've asked for some updated information from the consultant. We'll see that in July. If that satisfies and we're ready to make a
Just
vote,
ask the opinion of the consultant.
we're targeting end of July or August, but time will tell.
Asking the opinion of the consultant, what you talked about tonight, will the state accept it? In your opinion?
Based on what we've modeled, the districts that we've chosen, and the zoning parameters that we've run, this scenario we've presented tonight appears to meet the compliant the regulations that the state is asking Winthrop to meet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry. Hi, good evening. Gianna Tamas, candidate for 3rd Suffolk State Rep. What I've heard from you all tonight is wonderful information, but my concern is, what are the benefits to the town besides the grants?
Yeah, I can only say the grants are a benefit. Not spending legal dollars until we know the outcome from other towns is a benefit.
But it sounds like more of a detriment to our tiny little community than the money. And us as a community in Winthrop, we've always found a way. We've always found a way to do things. And I appreciate that. And that's why I came back to Winthrop, why I love Winthrop. Winthrop's my home, and why I'm running for state rep. But in the same breath, I mean, our schools are at capacity, as we've heard over and over. Our roads are at capacity over and over. Is there a plan to add an additional school, and where? Because if you add an additional 800 units, there's a good chance that there's 300 students. Where are they gonna go? So I'm sure I came in late. Maybe you might have touched on it, but is there a plan for that as well? Is there a plan on adding an additional access road? Are we going to build another bridge for us to get in and out of town? So with that being said, like, what is the plan besides obtaining funds in addition to complying with the law? And as a town, I feel like we do have a right to vote on it.
Totally. I would say as respectfully as I can, our task as a board is to find a planning path forward to comply with 3A.
Mm-hmm.
These are great questions that you should ask of town council or other elected officials.
Okay.
Our task as a committee is to find a planning designation. We'll move forward with that and make a recommendation.
I just want to ensure that that's on your minds as well, because I know, as talking to all the constituents and all the town members, it's the first thing on their mind is A, B, C, and D, as I just mentioned. So I want to ensure that it's all in your minds as well while you're working with a consultant to include all these variables, because they are important.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, Paul Caruccio, too. I want to thank you for a very interesting presentation, and I want to thank you for very clever manipulation of the regulation in order to accomplish the goal with the minimum amount of disruption. However, I do want to add, and I understand the planning board's job is to simply find the way to get it done, but this is a colossal overreach by government. And what it does is take away our local control. And that's a recipe for disaster, and it simply is not right. And if we allow it this time, the overreach of government will find other areas in which to disrupt our lives. So thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. It was very clever, and I do appreciate that. But the base of this law and this rule is all wrong. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Sure.
It's very difficult to see these slides. I'm sorry. It was very difficult to read these slides. Is there any chance that you could post this information so it can be shared with our neighbors and friends?
We'll put this on the town website.
On the Winthrop website?
We will, yep.
Okay, that'll be great. Thank you.
Town manager, want to say something?
I just want to, we have a 3A page on our town website. We'll make sure that this is posted on there. So people, all the documents related to MBTA and 3A zoning, it has all this information. So we'll make sure this is up tomorrow.
Hi, my name is Gerard Leary. You guys got a lot of guts. You did a good job tonight. What would happen if, like the district at Seal Harbor was rejected, and there's so many units that you had proposed for there? would you just reevaluate the number of units that you had proposed on the whole plan, or what would happen with that?
If the question is if Seal Harbor is an example, but any district was rejected by the state
Yeah.
for compliance, what would we do then?
There's probably a couple different options. One, we'd have to look for other districts. Two, we could look at districts that we've already looked at and try to increase the unit capacity. But that's kind of the two choices I think we would have.
Thanks.
Seeing no other public comment?
And about Fort Heath? Fort Heath is included in there, yeah. Yeah, Fort Heath is included in that zone. You're welcome. Fort Heath is included, yeah.
Okay, seeing no other public comment, I think we'll make a motion to continue to the 16th. We'll look for updates then. 6 p.m. on the 16th at the Senior Center, same space. Yep.
One other, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yep.
One other final thing. I know there's been some concern about Zoom capacity here. We are looking into it. I'm trying to get pricing for it to find out what it would cost to be able to have Zoom live from this room. We're not there yet, but we are trying to get it. So I just want to let everybody know we're working on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.